the best of the week on Relevant Radio.
Today in the Catholic Church, globally, it's the Feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe. And I'm sure you've seen the image. If you're not a Catholic, chances are you've gone to a Mexican restaurant or you've seen the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe. It was a miraculous image that was imprinted in a scientifically inexplicable way. Scientists are still puzzling over this and many other aspects of this. It's called a tilma, and that is the very crudely woven plant-based fiber shawl that people back in the day, and this took place, by the way, the apparitions took place in 1531. Today is the feast day, December the 12th, in which we honor the fact that Our Lady, during a time of great upheaval and the loss of many Catholic folk in Europe, for example, because Martin Luther got the whole thing started, so to speak, with the 95 Thesis on the door of the cathedral in Wittenberg. And there's dispute whether he actually nailed it there or whatever he did with that. But the main thing is that the Protestant Reformation or rebellion or revolution or whatever term you prefer to use began then, and many Catholics left the church, Martin Luther among them. And down the road, others too, like John Calvin, left the Catholic Church. He was raised Catholic. And many millions of Catholics fell away from the faith and wound up in various groups within the Protestant world. And it just so happens, I don't think it was coincidental, that Our Lady appears to a simple, rural, rustic Indian guy. His baptismal name was Juan Diego. This was in 1531 on December the 12th. And it was a series of apparitions that took place over a few days. And here's what happened. He was going to help his uncle who was sick, and he traipsing along. He lived up in the foothills of the mountains that surround Mexico City. And he was just bebopping along, minding his own business, and this beautiful young woman who was dazzlingly radiant and golden rays of light shining from her, and she appears to him on this mountain pathway, and she starts talking to him. And one of the things she said was, I'm your mother, I'm here to help you, paraphrasing. And she says, I'd like you to go to the bishop and tell him to build a church here. Here? Up here in the middle of nowhere? Yeah, here, right here. So he does. He tries to evade her. So like the next day, he's going out to go take care of business, and he decides to go a different way because he doesn't want to see her again, because he doesn't know why she would be talking with him. And he's kind of afraid, kind of doubtful about why he should go to the bishop, whom he thinks would not even listen to him. Just this basic country bumpkin is probably the way he thought of himself. But he was a humble man, so he thought, well, I'll just go a different way. And she meets him on that path. And she tells him more and reiterates the request that the bishop build a church on this place. So he does. He goes to the bishop, Bishop Zumarraga, and tells him, or, relays to him through the servants, because the servants were not going to show him into the bishop immediately. And the bishop's response was, bring me some kind of proof. And I think the bishop was probably just being kind. He wasn't going to simply blow this guy off and slam the door. He was being kind to him, like knowing or thinking he knew that he would not have any proof because this is probably nothing. So he asks him to bring some proof. So the next apparition, he tells Our Lady, well, I did go to the bishop, but he wasn't really interested, and he said, bring some proof. And she said, well, look over there. Keep in mind, this is December, middle of December. It's chilly. It's cold, in fact. Not at all unlikely that there would have been snow on the ground. So she said, look over there. And what does he see? He sees these beautiful Castilian roses in full bloom, which they should not have been, not in that place, not in that weather, etc. And there they were in full bloom. So he goes over and he realizes, I can take these to the bishop, because this is like a miracle, isn't it? Because how would I ever find beautiful roses in full bloom in the middle of winter up here? So he grabs the bottom of the tilma, which is basically it's a poncho. There's a hole at the top for your head, comes down to your knees, more or less, in the front, and it goes down on the back. These garments were not intended to last a long time, maybe get you through. They would carry babies, the women would, and it was like a working garment. And so he gathers up a bunch of these beautiful roses, and he puts them in, he lifts up in the front, the bottom of the tilma, places the roses there, kind of folds it back over to keep them in place. And he goes back down the mountain into the city, and he goes to the bishop's residence, and he says, well, I'd like to see the bishop. He asked me to bring him some evidence, and I've got something here for him. So he goes into the room where the bishop is. And he says, well, Your Excellency, I have this. And he opens the tilma. And, of course, there's shock and awe, and the people in the room were just nonplussed because these roses came tumbling out. But that really wasn't the focal point of the bishop's attention. It was because this image that you can still see today, roughly 500 years later, you can see the image of this woman whom we know as Our Lady of Guadalupe. And it was stunning to them because, first of all, how is this guy ever possibly going to get something like that so beautifully and vividly present on this tilma? How would he ever get something like that? Where would he get it? He didn't have any money. He didn't go to Paris and commission an artist to do this. And so that's the first thing. The roses were like, yeah, that's great, but wow, look at this. And so the tilma, of course, became property of the church very quickly. He didn't leave with the tilma on, and I'm sure he didn't want to. This must be preserved and studied and considered and all that. So eventually, not that long after, the bishop did indeed consent to build a church on Tepeyac Hill. That was the hill in the foothills of the mountains where this apparition took place. And people were so startled by this and wowed by this and realized very quickly, this is from Our Lady. This is like a photograph of her. And in the 500 years ensuing, once modern science really began to be available, the scientists who studied this tilma met with a number of just astonishing facts about it. Number one, no matter how closely they examined it with microscopes and x-rays and whatever other means that they sought to examine this cloth, they couldn't see any evidence that it was painted or drawn. There was no tracing below the image over which an artist might have painted. There is no paint. There is no pigment. There's no dye. The colors are in the fibers. And scientists are still baffled as to how did these vibrant, rich, beautiful colors get into these fibers of the tilma. They still don't know. And other things besides. I mean, there is a lot about the tilma that we could talk about. I want to just spend a moment or so talking about this because it is a miracle you can still see to this very day. You can go to Mexico City. I've been there before any number of times. And you can, now it's in the Basilica of Our Lady of Guadalupe in Mexico City. It's the newer one. Well, new as of, let's say, the 1970s. Because Lake Texcoco, which is the lake, it's not there really anymore, but it was the lake bed upon which Mexico City continued to be built after the conquest of the Aztecs. And so in some ways, the ground is not stable and things tend to sink if they're not built properly. And the old basilica that was built hundreds of years ago is sinking. Now, they've been able to rectify that. And back in the day when I was there the first time, it was like tilting. The old basilica was tilting. And so you couldn't go in there because it was a hazard. But they moved it to the new basilica. And you can go on it's like a flat conveyor belt. It's not really an escalator because it's not going up. It would be like in the airport. And if you want to get to your gate faster, you get on that people mover and you move faster. There's one of those there, and you go by and you have enough time to really closely look at this image. It's behind bulletproof, bomb-proof glass. And the reason it's behind bomb-proof glass is because there was an attempt to destroy the tilma, and somebody placed, I think it was like 29 or 30 sticks of dynamite in the flowers on the altar where this image was hung behind, just regular glass, like in a frame. Keeping in mind it had been exposed to sunlight for centuries. People would touch the tilma. There was soot from candles. There were all the things you're not supposed to do with a precious historical artifact because it will cease to exist in due time, or the image, the paint, etc., if it's exposed to sunlight, the way this was carried in processions outside, you name it. And it still has the same vibrant colors today as it did then. That, too, is inexplicable. But this bomb went off. 29 sticks of dynamite, I believe it was, went off, destroyed everything around it. Badly damaged the marble altar, destroyed, shattered the windows, and thankfully nobody was killed. And the tilma was untouched. There's even an iron cross, a big, heavy iron cross that is visible in a glass case in the Basilica in Mexico City that was bent and twisted. I mean, this is a heavy, big crucifix, not something you'd wear around your neck. I think this may stand, 3-4 feet high. And utterly mangled in this bomb blast, and yet the image itself hanging right nearby that was not damaged at all. So the scientists looking at this are figuring out basically nothing. Like, how do we account for this? And with all of the modern science now, some things emerged that for the first 450 years, or roughly that, say the first 400 years, we didn't even understand, we didn't even know scientifically that the iris of your eye, we talk about, well, the glint in his eye, or her eyes were shining, things like that. Well, that's because light reflects off of your eyes. And in the iris of your eye, there is an opposite exact image of what it is that you're seeing. Now, we didn't know that. We didn't have the optometry skills to know those things until the 20th century. And they figured out, well, let's see what's in those eyes. So they put the tilma under a micron microscope, could zoom in very, very closely. And with this new technology that was unavailable before, and the new medical awareness of what this actually would involve, the reflection of what the person that you're taking a picture of would be seeing, what they discovered was, it was over a dozen, might have been 15, maybe 16, something like that, figures of people who were staring at this image the moment that the image must have appeared to them on the tilma. And you can see people, you can see individual people, you could see a family, there could be some servants there. You see a figure who very much resembles the bishop of that time, Bishop Zumarraga, and they all look astonished because they're seeing something that is amazing them. How did that get there? I mean, that's just one of the many mysterious aspects of the tilma. There are others. So how did that get there? There's no scientific way to explain it. St. Juan Diego, he couldn't have put it there. None of the artisans could have done that. We didn't even know that kind of phenomenon even existed. That would be a discovery later, much later. So, point being, back in 1531, when this took place, a wholesale loss of Catholic folk because of the Protestant rebellion, I would put it, in Europe was taking place. And guess what happened? In Mexico, within a matter of a few years, upwards of between 9 and 11 million indigenous people were converted to Christ. They received baptism, and they were brought into the Catholic faith. Many millions of them in a very short period of time. And one little footnote, just if you're interested, there were missionaries there for years before this. And they had very, very poor results in trying to preach the gospel of Jesus and baptize, etc. They had very meager results. But when this image appeared and the church was built, the native peoples recognized in this image, she's one of us. She looks like us. She's got dark skin. She appears to be a noble woman because of the way she's dressed. She's blocking out the sun. I mean, she's basically greater than the sun, and for many of them, the sun was understood to be a kind of god. That was not unusual in many cultures back in the day. So she's somebody very important. She's a VIP if ever there were one, because look, she's blocking out the sun. and so on. And as I say, there are many other details about this that I would encourage you to take a look at. And if for whatever reason you have an opportunity to see the image, ask yourself this question: how is it that after being exposed to sunlight and soot and flash photography and people with their grubby hands touching this tilma, a bomb going off that destroys everything around it except for this, how is it that these colors are as bright and beautiful and vivid today as they were not quite 500 years ago? Riddle me this, is what I would say. I believe it's a miracle. I believe that this is yet another example of the Blessed Virgin Mary coming to God's children and saying, I'm here to help you. I'm here to pray for you. I'm here for you, kind of thing. So that's just a little morsel, if you want the historical background of why we celebrate, we Catholics anyway, and other people too. It's not just Catholics. Would that everybody would take this to heart, but it's a beautiful thing. Jesus said in John chapter 17, he said, Father, I have given them the glory that you have given to me. And this is one ray of that glory that you can still see today, all those years later. You can join me by listening to The Patrick Madrid Show on the Relevant Radio app, live each weekday at 8 to 11 a.m. And thanks for listening.